The last weary rays of an autumn sun strained through the tall window, casting long, melancholy shadows across the immaculate surface of the dining table. A heavy, syrupy silence filled the room, the kind that presses on the eardrums and feels like the charged stillness before a summer storm. Olivia moved with a quiet precision, setting the table by rote, her mind ticking through a mental checklist. Her placemat, her daughters, her husband's. Everything had to be perfect. It always was. From the living room, the muffled roar of a televised soccer game provided a dull, constant hum. Michael called it his weekly dose of athletic drama. Olivia paused for a split second, listening to that familiar noise. A lifetime ago, it had been their shared ritual, yelling at the screen in unison, hugging in a burst of spontaneous joy when his team scored. Now it was just background static, a sonic wall separating his world from hers. A lifetime of bags, one final sale, 80% off. A must-have pair of shoes for those with poor balance. Metformin users shocked by this natural alternative. The front door groaned softly on its hinges, and Chloe drifted into the kitchen. 15 years old, all sharp angles and quiet grace, with a hint of unspoken sorrow clouding her eyes. She shot a quick, assessing glance at her mother, reading the emotional weather in the room. "Is Dad going to be home soon?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He said by 7, Olivia replied, working hard to keep her tone even, a placid lake surface hiding turbulent depths. "Could you give me a hand with the salad?" Chloe nodded and reached for a kitchen towel. The silence descended again, thick and palpable, broken only by the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a knife against a cutting board. Olivia found herself flinching at every small sound from the street: footsteps on the communal staircase, the distant slam of a car door. At exactly 7 o'clock, the deadbolt turned with a definitive clunk. Olivia's heart stuttered in her chest, then began to race, a frantic drum against her ribs. Michael entered. He didn't just walk into a room, he occupied it, his presence as tangible and oppressive as a sudden drop in barometric pressure. He shrugged off his suit jacket and tossed it carelessly over the back of a living room armchair, a gesture of ownership. Dinner began with its usual silent ceremony. Michael was immediately absorbed by his phone, his eyes scanning a stream of messages. Chloe pushed a piece of broccoli around her plate with a fork. Olivia could feel every muscle in her body tensing, a coil winding tighter and tighter. "How was your day at the office?" she asked, the question sounding brittle as she broke a roll in half. "What?" He looked up, his expression distant, as if pulled from a far more important thought. "Oh, the usual. Putting out fires, closing out the quarterly reports. The numbers look decent." He said it with an air of someone solely responsible for conjuring those decent numbers from thin air. Olivia simply nodded.
"We have that parent-teacher conference tomorrow at school," Chloe started. "Not now, sweetheart," Michael cut her off, not looking up from his screen. "Your dad is exhausted." Olivia watched the light in her daughter's eyes flicker and die. A familiar, dull ache throbbed in her own chest. Her gaze drifted to his jacket, slung over the chair in the doorway. Navy blue, expensive, a symbol of his status, his world. A world that had less and less room for them with each passing day. "Are you still sure you can take that time off in November?" Olivia pressed, a desperate attempt to pull him back across the divide, into the family, to this table. "We talked about the trip." "Olivia, not now. November is a nightmare. A vacation is the last thing on my mind." He sawed through his steak, and the screech of his knife against the porcelain plate made Olivia flinch. His tone was laced with a fresh, sharp irritation. She set her own fork down, her appetite gone. "Okay, it's just that Chloe and I were hoping. Do you have any idea what it's like out there right now?" His head snapped up, and his gaze, finally landing on her, was heavy and cold. "The market is brutal. Our competitors are circling like sharks, and you're talking about a beach vacation." He said you, drawing a line in the sand, separating himself from them. Olivia looked down at her plate. A memory surfaced unbidden. Another dinner. A decade ago. And their first crummy rented apartment. They'd shared a cheap pizza and laughed, making grand plans for the future. He'd held her hand and said, "We're going to make it live, together." Now they had made it, and there was no room for together anymore. Michael pushed back from the table. "I've got to pack. Early start tomorrow. I'm heading out of town for a business trip." Olivia slowly lifted her eyes to him. "A business trip? You never mentioned it." "Came up last minute," he said, already walking toward the bedroom without a backward glance. "I'll be back the day after tomorrow." He disappeared down the hall. Chloe stood silently, carried her plate to the sink, and retreated to her room without a word. Olivia was left alone in the middle of her perfect kitchen and her perfect apartment, which had suddenly transformed into a beautifully appointed prison cell. Her eyes drifted back to the suit jacket. A strange, magnetic pull drew her to her feet. She approached it, running a hand over the coarse, expensive wool. There was something in the pocket. Loose change? His keys? She slowly, hardly breathing, slipped her fingers inside. It wasn't change. It wasn't keys. It was a lipstick. A small, elegant tube in a gold case. She clicked it open. The color was a bold, almost aggressive scarlet. Nothing like the subtle, rosy nudes she always wore. She snapped the case shut, squeezing it in her palm until the metal edges bit into her skin. She felt no surge of anger, no sharp sting of pain. Her face was a calm, expressionless mask. She returned to the table and began clearing the dishes, her movements precise and mechanical. She walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, and placed the first plate under a stream of scalding water. Steam billowed into the air. And then, watching that cloud of vapor, Olivia whispered, so softly that even her daughter wouldn't hear, a promise to herself. "All right, Michael, let's play your game."
She dried her hands, pulled out her phone, and found the number for his executive assistant, Sophia. "Sophia, hello, it's Olivia, Michael's wife," she said, her voice even and disarmingly friendly. "So sorry to bother you this evening, but he seems to have left his passport, and with the trip tomorrow, I could send a courier to the airport. Could you remind me which flight he's on?" There was a brief, but profoundly eloquent pause on the other end of the line. "Olivia, I wasn't aware of any trip. There's nothing on Mr. Evans's schedule for tomorrow." Olivia slowly closed her eyes. "I see. Thank you, Sophia. I must have misheard him." She set the phone down on the counter. In the silence of the kitchen, the soft tap it made was as final as a judge's gavel. "So, what do you think Olivia should do next? Honestly, I'm on the edge of my seat here. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're invested in seeing how this plays out, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the next part." The silence in the apartment was now a hollow, ringing thing. After the call, Olivia stood at the sink for a full 10 minutes, just staring at the dark square of the window, her own pale, detached reflection staring back. Her hand, tucked in her robe pocket, was clenched around the gold lipstick tube. It burned her skin like a live ember. She pulled it out and looked again at the garish red. It was a challenge, a brazen, arrogant one, thrown directly in her face. He hadn't even bothered to be careful. He thought she was safe, blind and deaf. Her thoughts were a tangled knot. A dull pounding had started in her temples. She walked out of the kitchen and into the living room. The door to Chloe's room was slightly ajar, a sliver of light and the muffled thrum of music spilling out from underneath. A sharp, physical pang of pity for her daughter, for both of them, shot through her. She sat on the sofa and picked up her daughter's tablet. Chloe had recently asked her father for help connecting to a cloud storage service for a school project. Michael, ever the busy man, had found a minute to set it up and had likely forgotten to log out. A small thing. A trivial oversight. A tiny crack in his fortress of control. Her fingers trembled as she opened the application. She felt like a thief, peering through a keyhole into a forbidden room. But it was her right, a right to the truth. At first, she found nothing. Work files, invoices, presentations. It was all clean. Too clean. And then she saw it. A folder with no name, tucked away among the others. Inside was a single file, an archive message history from an encrypted messenger app. Olivia took a deep, shuddering breath and opened it. The first messages were from 6 months ago. An unsaved number, signed off as Isabella. They were professional, clipped. "Michael, the contracts are ready. Please move the meeting to 5. Then the tone began to shift. Emojis appeared. Jokes. "You were incredible in that meeting today. Everyone was in awe. Thanks, but I couldn't do it without my reliable anchor." Anchor. That's what he used to call her, Olivia. Now the word was being flung into the digital ether, addressed to another woman. Olivia read on, and her heart turned into a frozen lump of pain. She scrolled further, and each new screen was another twist of the knife. "Miss you. When will I see you?" "Soon, sunshine. Very soon. I can't stand this suffocating atmosphere at home anymore."
Olivia froze. Suffocating atmosphere. Their home. Their life. She kept scrolling. And then, a message sent 3 weeks ago made the blood freeze in her veins. It was from Michael. "Don't worry about her. She's become such a dull, plain little thing. Just a domestic woman who thinks about laundry and what's for dinner. You're a breath of fresh air, my muse. Soon, when we're together, I'll buy you that penthouse in the city center you've been dreaming of. Start looking." The world swam around her. Dull, plain little thing? Domestic woman? The words burned worse than any shouted insult. It was a total erasure of everything she was. All those years she had given to him, to their home, to their daughter. She had left a promising career as an architectural designer so he could build his empire unimpeded. She had managed the household, solved a million daily problems, created the very anchor he now so cynically boasted about. And all of it was now reduced to a dull, plain little thing. Darkness crowded the edges of her vision. She set the tablet down, afraid she would shatter it. A silent scream of injustice built inside her. Memories crashed over her in a wave. They were in that tiny apartment, and he, holding her hands, had said, "It's okay, Liv. We'll make it. I'll be a big shot, and you'll design your amazing buildings. We're a team." A team? What a sorry team it was, where one partner was a breath of fresh air, and the other was a dull little thing, to be traded in for a newer, shinier model. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Tears traced hot paths down her cheeks, but she wiped them away angrily, as if afraid he might somehow see her weakness. And then, cutting through the fog of hurt, another memory surfaced. Not of Michael, of her grandmother. A stern, upright woman who had survived a war and a long siege. She'd sat with a young Olivia at her kitchen table, stirring tea in a glass, and said in her quiet, brook-no-argument voice, "Remember, my dear, trust a person, but always verify their actions. And always, you hear me, always have your go bag. Not just money, but strength and will and resolve. The world is fragile and people change. You must be ready to stand up and walk away, without ever having to look back for anyone's permission." Olivia straightened. Her tears dried. Her grandmother had been right. The time for trust was over. The time for verification had come. And her go bag, it wasn't just her grandmother's antique sapphire earrings and the gold bar hidden on the top shelf of the closet. It was her own will, which she had sedated for years for the sake of a fragile, false peace. She turned and looked at the closed door of her daughter's room. For Chloe? For herself?
for the woman architect she had buried under a mountain of domesticity. She picked up the tablet and carefully erased all traces of her presence in the account. Everything had to remain exactly as it was, as if she knew nothing.
For now. Her face in the window's reflection was calm and hard. The game was just beginning, and this time, she would be the one writing the rules. The next morning, Olivia woke her daughter as if it were any other day. She helped her get ready for school, packed her lunch. Her face was a placid mask, almost serene. Inside, however, a cold, precise machinery was whirring into action, as if she were back at her old drafting table, working on a complex blueprint. Every line had to be perfect, every calculation exact. After seeing Chloe off, she returned to the apartment. The silence, usually so oppressive, was now her ally. She worked methodically, without haste. Her first stop was her grandmother's antique dresser, the one that stood in her room as a reminder of a sturdier, more resilient world. On the very top shelf, behind a stack of linens, was a simple box of dark wood. Olivia retrieved it. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, were those antique sapphire earrings, the last remnant of her grandmother's former elegance, and a small sealed gold bar, her go bag. She had almost sold them 5 years ago when Michael had his first major business crisis, a cash flow disaster. He'd been pale and exhausted, not sleeping for days. Olivia had offered them to him herself. But he had refused, with what seemed like pride. "I don't live off a woman's charity," he'd declared, and his eyes had shone with what she'd mistaken for nobility. "We will handle this ourselves." She had believed him, believed in that strong man. Now she saw it for what it was, pride. And that very pride was about to become a cornerstone in the wall she was building around him. She carefully placed the box into her tote bag. Next, she needed proof. She went down to the storage locker where years of document folders had accumulated. She was looking for receipts, invoices, any slip of paper that proved her financial contributions to their shared life. She remembered everything. That designer light fixture for the living room? She had paid for it with the bonus from her last pre-maternity leave project. The kitchen renovation? She had sold the car she'd inherited from her parents. She'd never asked for IOUs, considering it beneath them. Now she cursed her own naivete. Hour after hour, she sifted through the papers. And then, in an old folder marked taxes, her fingers found a sheet of paper, folded in quarters. She unfolded it and couldn't believe her eyes. It was an IOU, worn, yellowed, but perfectly preserved. In a firm, familiar hand, it read, "I, Michael James Evans, have received from Olivia Marie Evans as an interest-free loan for business development, personal valuables with a total value equivalent to $500,000, with an obligation for repayment upon demand." It listed the items: 1 pair of gold and sapphire earrings, 1 50-gram gold bar. At the bottom was the date from that difficult period, and his sprawling, confident signature. He had taken them. He'd taken them when things got desperate, and had then, apparently, immediately buried the memory and the note. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit, even to himself, that he had accepted help. This piece of paper was more than a financial document. It was proof of his hypocrisy. The next step was a lawyer. She found a woman, recommended by an old friend who'd once said she could get blood from a stone and make the stone apologize for the inconvenience. The attorney's office was severe and minimalist. The woman herself, in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, listened to Olivia without a trace of superfluous emotion. "So," the attorney made a note on a legal pad, "your husband's business is in his name. The apartment was purchased during the marriage, so it's joint property. That's good. But we need to fortify your position. Do you have proof of your direct financial injections into this asset?" Silently, Olivia laid the collected receipts and the IOU on the desk. The lawyer studied the documents, spending a long time on the IOU, then gave a curt, approving nod. "Excellent.
This is a serious advantage. The court will look favorably on this. Furthermore, she looked at Olivia over her glasses, we can petition for compensation. You spent years maintaining the household and raising a child, which allowed your husband to grow his business and increase his income unimpeded. Your unpaid labor has a material value. As Olivia listened, something inside her straightened, uncoiled. Her years, her labor, her sacrifice, it was all gaining weight, becoming a weapon. Not a weapon of revenge, but one of restitution. I'm ready, she said, her voice quiet but clear. On her way home, she stopped in a small neighborhood park and sat on a bench. She watched children play and, for the first time in many days, didn't feel like a cornered victim. She was a strategist. She was drafting her most important life project, a project she called freedom. She took out her phone and opened a long-forgotten sketching app. With one finger, she drew a single line across the screen. It was crooked, imperfect, but it was hers. It was a beginning. Michael returned 2 days later. He came in noisily, tossed his keys onto the console table, and still in his coat, marched into the kitchen, drawn by the scent of a roasting chicken. I'm home, he declared, as always. Olivia, standing at the stove, merely nodded, continuing to stir a pan of gravy. She noted he looked rumpled and irritable. Isabella, it seemed, had not lived up to the hype, or perhaps business wasn't so smooth. A part of her, the part that had loved him for over a decade, felt a pang of pity. But the new part, the cold and calculating part, merely logged this as a vulnerability in his defenses. Chloe emerged from her room and greeted him timidly. Michael gave her hair an absent-minded tousle, but his gaze was distant, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Dinner was a tense, silent affair. Michael ate wordlessly, staring at his plate. Olivia watched him as if he were a lab specimen, noting every crease of displeasure on his face. She was waiting. "How was your trip?" she finally asked, in her most neutral domestic tone. He flinched, as if yanked from a deep thought. "What?" "Fine. The usual." He took a sip of water and set the glass down with a little too much force. "Just tired of it all. This stifling feeling." Olivia lifted her eyes to him. "What feeling, Michael?" "All of it." He gestured wildly around the room. "These walls, this predictability, the same thing, day in, day out. It's like living in a cage." Olivia slowly set her fork down, her heart hammered, but her voice remained steady. "And what would you like to change?" He shot her a scornful look. "You wouldn't understand. You're here, in your cozy little world. Cooking, cleaning, watching your shows. You don't evolve, Olivia. You don't grow. The world is moving at light speed and you're standing still." She looked at him, and the words from the message history echoed in her mind. Dull, plain little thing, domestic woman. He was repeating the mantra, convincing first his mistress, and now, apparently, himself. "And what does growing look like to you?" she asked, and a sliver of steel entered her voice for the first time. "Chasing the next big deal? Buying penthouses for young associates?" Michael went perfectly still. His eyes narrowed. He sensed danger, but couldn't pinpoint its source. "Don't be naive. I'm talking about momentum, ambition. You buried everything you once had a long time ago, all your own interests." It was then that Chloe, who had been hunched over her plate, murmured softly, "Mom's been drawing. There are new sketches on her tablet." Michael snorted, redirecting his irritation toward his daughter. "Drawing? Doodles? That's not growth, Chloe. That's a hobby. You'll understand when you're older. You'll grow up to be—" He stumbled, searching for the word, and spat out the one that sat deepest in his soul. "Just as mediocre."
The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Chloe paled and looked down, her lips trembling. And in Olivia, something finally snapped.
Patience, fear, pity, it all ruptured at once. She rose slowly from the table. Her movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. She looked at him, not with anger, but with a vast, icy calm. "And what have you given her, Michael?" Her voice was quiet, but every word hit its mark like a nail. "Besides money for the latest phone, besides criticism that she isn't performing well enough, what example have you set? An example of how to abandon your family? How to lie and call it evolution? How to betray the people who stood by you for years, all for a breath of fresh air?" Michael jumped to his feet. His face was contorted with rage. He was caught, and he knew it. And his only remaining tool was brute force. "Shut up," he hissed across the table. "You don't understand anything. You live on my money, a kept woman, and you dare to judge me?" Olivia didn't flinch. She stood, straight and unyielding, holding his gaze. And in her eyes, he finally saw not the dull little thing he had imagined, but a different woman. A strong one. A dangerous one. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'm leaving." She walked around the table, went to her trembling daughter, and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Go pack a bag. Just the essentials. We're leaving." "Where?" Chloe whispered, her voice thick with fear. "To your Aunt Sarah's for now." Olivia turned back to Michael, who was braced against the table, breathing heavily. "But remember this moment, Michael. These are the last words you'll speak as the master of this house." She didn't wait for a reply. Taking her daughter's hand, she walked out of the kitchen. Half an hour later, with 2 suitcases, they left the apartment. Michael didn't see them out. He remained at the table, utterly convinced he had just won the war, completely unaware that all his defenses had already been surrendered without a fight.